Imagine this. 300 workers gathered in secret, digging right across a city in the middle of the night.
Wow.
Yeah. And by morning, oil is flowing under the streets. A brand new pipeline. Rivals. Totally stunned. Didn't even know what happened until it was, well, too late.
That's quite an image.
Or picture this.
Yeah.
One of the richest men the world had ever known. He looks in the mirror, but he doesn't see the titan of industry. He sees, I don't know, a prematurely old, troubled face looking back.
Yeah, those pictures, they really nail the core of the story we're getting into today, don't they?
They really do.
It takes you from those like muddy, wild oil boom towns, fortune and disaster, right next to each other, all the way to these polished boardrooms where, huge power was being wielded, fierce battles, often pretty brutal.
Definitely a complex time, a
Yeah.
pivotal time in American history, for sure.
Absolutely.
And we're kind of unlocking all this through one particular book, God's Gold, the story of Rockefeller and his times. And the title itself,
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like just a dry history book, does it? It frames it more like
Yeah.
like an epic adventure.
Or a big historical drama. Yeah. Full of these larger-than-life characters, and events that basically reshaped the world economy. It's quite something.
So think of us as your guides through this incredible story.
Right. Our goal is really to unpack the most important bits, the key insights from God's Gold. We want to sort of distill this big, complex narrative, make it easy to follow, memorable, and hopefully full of the surprising details you might not expect.
Okay, so let's set the stage a bit.
Yeah.
What was America like when John D. Rockefeller was born?
Well, the book describes a country just buzzing with motion, constant change.
Yeah.
It was right on the edge of this massive transformation. You had machinery changing everything, railroads connecting places faster than ever before. People were moving west, pouring into towns and cities.
A land of huge opportunity, no doubt.
For sure, but also, really disorienting change and fierce, fierce competition. The old ways were definitely fading, and these powerful new forces were taking over.
God's Gold really paints a picture of that ferment, doesn't it?
Right.
Traditional businesses just couldn't keep up with the scale, the speed.
Exactly. It was a landscape almost perfectly suited for someone with this unique mix of, vision, discipline, and this almost obsessive need for order and all that chaos.
Which brings us right to Rockefeller himself. So where does his story really kick off in the book?
It goes right back to the beginning. His family background is, it's interesting.
How so?
His father, William Rockefeller, he's portrayed as this kind of elusive guy, a traveling salesman, often just appearing and disappearing, kind of mysterious.
Okay.
But his mother, Eliza, she's described in God's Gold as the complete opposite, the anchor. Deeply religious, incredibly strong-willed, she instilled this really powerful sense of discipline and duty in young John right from the start.
So the family moved around a bit.
Yeah, they did. Eventually ended up in Cleveland. And the book points out finding work back then, especially when the economy was down, not easy.
Right.
But Rockefeller was driven. He got his first real job as a clerk. Hewitt and Tuttle, they were produce commission merchants.
And what's amazing, reading about it in God's Gold, is how quickly his key traits just pop out.
Totally. His dedication was absolute. His thriftiness, legendary even then.
Yeah.
And he had this incredible knack for numbers, for arithmetic, doing calculations in his head.
Yeah, the book mentions his very first pay, $3.50 a week.
$3.50. It's hard to imagine.
And here's something really telling about him, even that young, that the book notes. He was already keeping meticulous track of every penny.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe more surprising, he started giving a chunk of that tiny wage to charity right away.
Yeah, that early giving, even before he got his first proper paycheck. God's Gold presents that as more than just a detail. It's like a real insight into the discipline and maybe that philanthropic impulse that would define his later life, obviously on a totally different scale.
So how did he get into business for himself? He was pretty young, right?
Very young. The book tells this story about Maurice B. Clark, another clerk, who suggested they start their own produce commission business. Rockefeller was only 18. He was definitely interested, but didn't have enough money saved up.
Okay, so where did the money come from?
He went to his father, and in a move that maybe, it kind of foreshadowed later dealings, perhaps, his father agreed to lend him the $1,000 he needed.
But there was a catch.
Oh, yeah. As detailed right there in God's Gold, there was a very specific condition. John had to pay him 10% interest.
Wow. From his own father.
Yep. But that early partnership, it really laid crucial groundwork for everything that came later.
And this first venture, it really highlights something fundamental about his approach, doesn't it? The book really emphasizes this.
Absolutely. His total focus on the business, his incredibly detailed planning, and this deep, almost obsessive desire to reduce or just eliminate the role of chance.
He thought planning could beat luck.
Pretty much. He believed exhaustive planning could overcome almost any unforeseen problem, bring order.
And that drive for order, for control, that became super important when the oil boom hit, right?
Critically important. After Colonel Drake hit oil in Pennsylvania, it just unleashed what God's Gold calls an oil Dorado, a crazy speculative rush. Chaos.
And chaotic is the word. The book describes this stampede to Oil Creek, these boom towns like Pithole just popping up overnight.
And Pithole is such a perfect example of how volatile it all was.
Yeah.
A town born instantly, huge excitement, but then it collapses just as fast. The book mentions things like fires, ice jams causing floods, wells just running dry, boom and bust super fast.
And for the guys actually finding the oil, getting it out was tough.
A nightmare, yeah. Transportation from the wells to the refineries was difficult, unreliable, expensive. That was the real bottleneck.
And this is where Rockefeller saw his chance, according to God's Gold.
Exactly. He makes this strategic shift, moves away from produce, goes into oil refining.
So why refining specifically? Why not drilling?
Well, the book suggests he saw refining as the place to bring structure, predictability to this wild industry, especially by tackling that constant problem of overproduction that kept killing prices. Refining was the control point.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And his drive to consolidate, to control Cleveland refining, was intense.
Relentless is probably the word. He teams up with Henry Flagler, a key partnership. And God's Gold notes Flagler had connections, access to serious capital through S.V. Harkness. Competition in Cleveland was really heating up.
And his method for dealing with rivals. The book describes it as incredibly direct, almost brutal.
Yeah, he basically gave them a stark choice. Sell your refinery to my company, Standard Oil.
Or else.
Or face being wiped out. That's the phrase used.
How could he make a threat like that?
Because Standard Oil had secured this key weapon, deals with the railroads, they got better rates, and crucially, these secret rebates.
Rebates, like kickbacks.
Essentially, yeah. They got paid back part of what they paid for shipping. It meant they could move oil way cheaper than anyone else. The book even says his own brother, Frank Rockefeller, initially resisted John D's tactics.
His own brother.
But in the end, God's Gold details how effective Rockefeller was. He gained control of almost all of Cleveland's refining capacity, a huge step in building the empire.
But that kind of rapid, aggressive consolidation, it must have caused a huge backlash.
Oh, absolutely furious opposition. God's Gold describes intense pushback from independent oil producers, other refiners, especially out in the oil regions themselves.
What did they do?
There were angry meetings, lots of threats. Groups like the Oil Men's League formed specifically to fight Standard Oil. They used petitions, tried to get political pressure going.
And transportation was still a major battleground.
Constantly. A fierce fight between the railroads, who liked the status quo, and this new technology. Pipelines. The book mentions pioneers like Van Sickle. But the core of the fight, according to God's Gold, was still those rebates, those unfair shipping rates that gave Standard Oil such a massive, crushing advantage.
And speaking of pipelines, that Bayonne pipeline story you mentioned at the start, that's in the book too.
Oh yeah, it's incredible. Planned in total secrecy, they stockpiled materials quietly. Then one night, 300 workers.
Just descended.
Exactly. Worked right through the night, digging the trench, laying the pipe across the city. God's Gold says by dawn, oil was already flowing under the streets.
And the rival.
Completely blindsided. The Jersey Central Railroad, for example. They had no idea until it was done. The book actually quotes someone saying Rockefeller showed the swiftness of a Napoleon in that instance, a real contrast to his usual patient, calculating style.
But as Standard Oil got bigger and more powerful, people started looking closer, right? Politicians.
Definitely. More public scrutiny, more political investigations. God's Gold talks about things like the Hepburn investigation. That really helped expose those secret railroad deals Standard Oil had, which just fueled public anger.
And this is when the mountains of hate, as the book calls it, really started to build.
Yeah, that phrase captures it well. Widespread accusations started flying around that Standard Oil was using its immense wealth to influence politics.
Bribes and things like that.
Allegations involving key figures like John D. Archibald, another Standard Oil executive, and various senators, governors. God's Gold recounts how these accusations and the public's reaction created this intense bitterness.
Was there any proof?
Well, a really significant moment the book details was when the newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst got hold of and published these letters, the Archbold letters.
When they showed.
They seem to provide pretty strong evidence of Standard Oil's political maneuvering, trying to influence laws, influence officials. It just added fuel to that fire. A huge scandal.
So as the years went by, did Rockefeller ever step back?
Eventually, yeah. He started withdrawing from the day-to-day running of the business. Partly, God's gold suggests, due to declining health.
And his focus shifted.
Dramatically, towards large-scale philanthropy, giving money away. Okay.
The book introduces Frederick Taylor Gates as this really crucial advisor, helping him figure out how to do it effectively, how to structure it all.
Did the book explain why he started giving so much away, his philosophy behind it?
It does. God's Gold explains that Rockefeller saw his incredible wealth as like a gift from God. He felt he had this duty to keep making money. He was good at it, but then equally important to use that money for the betterment of his race, as he put it.
So making money and giving it away were connected for him.
Almost like a partnership, the way
Yeah.
God's Gold presents it. You have mammon, the pursuit of wealth on one side, and God, the deliberate, thoughtful spending of that wealth for public good on the other. He saw his talent for making money as God-given, something to be used responsibly.
Interesting. What about his retirement? Did the book talk about his daily life?
Yeah, some of his routines became pretty well known. He played golf daily. The book sometimes even mentions his scores. There's a famous story about him proudly claiming a 39 for 9 holes once.
Still competitive. Seems like it. He also took regular car rides, and probably most famously, he started giving out dimes, shiny new dimes, to people he met.
The dime giving, I've heard about that.
It became part of his public image, but the legal troubles didn't just vanish.
No. What happened?
The Supreme Court eventually ordered the breakup, the dissolution of the original Standard Oil Trust.
So it was broken up.
Technically, yes, but God's Gold suggests that the way it was restructured, well, it still left control largely in the hands of a small group of men, including Rockefeller. So there was a lot of public skepticism about how real this alleged dissolution actually was.
And what about Rockefeller himself in his later years? Did the book offer any glimpses into his thoughts?
It does offer a few. Despite trying to stay healthy, stay positive, the book describes moments where he'd look in the mirror and just see this weary old man. There's also this kind of poignant sense reading it that he felt a bit alone. He'd outlived most of his original partners, his fiercest rivals, one of the last ones standing from those early rough days.
Is that where the story about the nickel comes in?
Yeah, that little anecdote is in God's Gold. He asks his secretary for a nickel one day and makes this comment, maybe joking, maybe deeply serious: money is the best of friends.
Wow. A small detail, but it says a lot about his life, his relationship with wealth.
It really does. So, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, it's just been an incredible and really complex journey, right? As told in this book.
Absolutely. From that super diligent young clerk, keeping track of pennies and giving to charity.
Right, to the master strategist who imposed order on a chaotic industry, navigated just brutal competition, faced down enormous public anger and political attacks.
And then finally turned all that energy towards massive organized philanthropy.
It's a story just packed with ambition, innovation, moments of, let's be honest, ruthless tactics and consequences that literally changed the world.
And really, like you said, we've only scratched the surface here today of the huge, fascinating story inside God's Gold, the story of Rockefeller in his times.
For sure. And you know, the story of John D. Rockefeller, it brings up these big questions that we still grapple with today, doesn't it?
Like what?
Well, what does it tell us about ambition itself? About that relentless drive for wealth, for power, especially in a free market system? How do you balance incredible efficiency, real innovation, against the methods someone might use to get to the top?
Yeah, and that whole intersection of big business, politics, public opinion back then.
Yeah.
It feels very relevant still. Those tensions haven't gone away.
Not at all. So, a final thought for you, the listener. To really get the full picture, the nuances of the man, the incredible times he lived in and shaped, we definitely encourage you to grab the book.
Yes. Find a copy of God's Gold, the story of Rockefeller and his times.
Yeah.
Read the whole thing. It's really a journey worth taking to form your own conclusions about one of modern history's most influential and controversial figures.